Sarah's heart raced as the Uber pulled up in front of her parents' townhouse in the prestigious neighbourhood of Kensington. The ivy-covered walls of their home had always felt like a fortress of expectations and tradition. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Tonight was the night she was going to introduce Jason to her parents. She had met him at a gallery opening in Shoreditch, where he was showcasing his latest street art. His work was raw, powerful, and unapologetic, everything that seemed so far removed from the genteel art her parents collected. Jason, on the other hand, was a mix of excitement and nerves. He had never dated a girl from such a high-class background, and he knew that her parents might not be as accepting of him as she was. He wiped his palms on his freshly ironed pants and stepped out of the car. As they approached the grand entrance, the door swung open, revealing Sarah's mother, Eleanor, in a tailored Chanel dress, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She offered a tight smile and a cold handshake. "Jason," she said, her voice as clipped as the garden hedges behind her, "it's a pleasure to meet you." "Thank you, Mrs. Fairchild," Jason replied, trying to ignore the judgment in her eyes. Her father, Charles, emerged from the study, a glass of whiskey in hand. He took a moment to look Jason up and down before extending his hand. "Welcome," he said gruffly. "Come in." The evening began with forced small talk over dinner. Sarah's parents asked him polite questions about his background, his family, and his aspirations. Jason, ever the gentleman, responded with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. But the tension in the room was palpable. It was as if the very air was charged with the electricity of unspoken disapproval. As dessert was served, the conversation turned to Sarah's recent internship at an art gallery. "So, Jason," Charles began, his voice dripping with condescension, "what is it that you do? Art, I believe." Jason nodded, his eyes never leaving Charles's. "I'm a street artist," he said proudly. "My work speaks to the struggles and beauty of the city and its diverse inhabitants." Eleanor's eyes widened. "How interesting," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But surely that's not a stable career path." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She had hoped her parents would be more open-minded, but she could see the cogs turning in their heads, calculating the social cost of her association with someone who didn't fit their mold. "I make a living," Jason replied, his voice firm, "and I'm happy doing what I love." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's parents exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "Well," Charles said, clearing his throat, "I suppose it's all about passion." Jason caught the subtle barb in his words but chose not to rise to it. Instead, he turned to Sarah and smiled, his love for her shining through. But the evening was about to take a darker turn. As they sat in the living room, sipping after-dinner coffee, the conversation grew more heated. Sarah's mother brought up the topic of the family's social calendar. "We're hosting a charity gala next week," she said, her eyes on Sarah. "It would be lovely if you could bring Jason." Sarah's heart swelled with hope. Maybe her parents were coming around. But before she could reply, her father spoke up. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said, his tone final. "It's a very exclusive event, and we wouldn't want to cause any discomfort." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger. "What do you mean, discomfort?" she snapped. "Well, darling," Eleanor said, her voice sugary sweet, "you know how some of the other families are. They might not understand your choice." Jason's eyes narrowed. "What they don't understand is that I—" The room grew colder as Jason's jaw clenched. "I think what you're really saying is that I don't meet your high society standards." "Now let's not jump to conclusions," Charles interjected, his voice calm but his eyes steely. "It's just that we wouldn't want to cause any embarrassment for you, or for ourselves." Sarah's fists clenched around the delicate porcelain of her teacup. Jason is not an embarrassment. He's talented and successful in his own right. "Talented, perhaps," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with patronizing sweetness. "But success is relative, dear. And in our circles, street art is hardly considered refined or respectable." Jason set his own cup down with a deliberate clink. I'm sorry if my art isn't up to your standards, but I'd rather be true to myself than cater to the tastes of people who can't appreciate the raw emotion in the work. Emotion doesn't pay the bills, Charles said, his tone dismissive. You need to think about your future, Sarah. What kind of life can a man like him provide for you? Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. I can make my own choices about what I consider a good life, Daddy. And if that means being with someone who isn't a carbon copy of your business partners, so be it. Eleanor sighed dramatically. We just want what's best for you, darling. Then maybe you should try listening to what I want, Sarah shot back, her voice shaking. The three of them stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken accusations and pain. It was clear that this was a battle that had been simmering for years, one that was finally coming to a boil. Look, Jason said, standing up. I don't think this is the right environment for us to be in. Sarah, let's go. Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She didn't bother to hide her emotions anymore. She knew her parents didn't understand, and she wasn't sure they ever would. As they walked out of the townhouse, the heavy door slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the quiet night. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They just don't get it. Jason wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Don't be, he murmured. They're just afraid of what they can't control. Sarah leaned into him, feeling his warmth and strength. But what if they never accept us? He kissed the top of her head. Then we'll make our own family, one that does. As they stepped into the cool London air, the weight of their unspoken words hung heavy between them. We can't let them define us, Jason said, his grip on her hand tightening. But they're my family, Sarah said, her voice trembling. He turned to face her, his eyes full of understanding. And I know that hurts, but we can't change who we are for them. We're in this together. Sarah looked into his eyes, finding the resolve she needed. You're right, she said, wiping a tear away. I won't let them dictate my happiness. The Uber pulled away, leaving them standing on the sidewalk, their futures uncertain but their love unshaken. They walked hand in hand through the moonlit streets, the cobblestones echoing their footsteps as they left the confines of Kensington behind. In the car, Sarah broke the silence. I'm sorry I brought you into this, she whispered. Jason squeezed her hand. Don't be. You didn't bring me into anything. I chose to be with you, and I'm not going anywhere. Her heart swelled with gratitude. Thank you, she murmured. I love you. He leaned in and kissed her, the passion in his touch speaking louder than any words could. I love you too, Sarah, more than anything. As they drove away from the gilded cage of her upbringing, she knew that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. The shadow of her parents' disapproval loomed large, but in the face of their shared love and conviction, it was nothing but a distant memory. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. She felt a strange mix of anger, sadness, and defiance towards her parents. They had always been the pillars of her world, the ones who had provided for her every need and shaped her into the person she was today. But now she saw them in a different light, as people with narrow minds and rigid expectations, unable to accept the choices she had made for herself. Jason, on the other hand, was a beacon of strength and support. He didn't push her to cut ties with her family, but he made it clear that he wouldn't stand for any further disrespect. His own background was one of struggle and perseverance, and he knew the value of staying true to oneself. He painted their apartment with vibrant colours, filling the space with the art that spoke to their souls. Each stroke was a declaration of their love and a silent rebellion against the confines of the world her parents had tried to impose on them. One evening, as Sarah sat on the floor of their living room, surrounded by paint cans and half-finished canvases, she looked up at Jason, who was perched on a ladder, adding the finishing touches to their latest collaborative piece. Do you ever doubt us? She asked, her voice small in the vastness of the room. He paused, brush in hand, and looked down at her with a serious expression. "Never," he said firmly. "We're perfect for each other. We balance each other out, challenge each other, and most importantly, we love each other." Her eyes searched his, finding the truth in his words. But what if they never come around? What if I'm choosing this life over them? Jason climbed down the ladder and knelt beside her. "You're not choosing me over them, you're choosing yourself. And if they can't support that, then maybe it's time to redefine what family really means." The following week, the charity gala loomed on the horizon. Sarah had been invited, of course, but the unspoken understanding was that she would attend alone. Her parents had made it clear that Jason's presence was not welcome, but instead of going to the gala, she and Jason decided to host their own event, a street art exhibition showcasing the work of emerging artists from all walks of life. It was a stark contrast to the stuffy, elitist world her parents moved in, and she knew it would make waves. On the night of the exhibition, the streets of Shoreditch were alive with colour and energy. The walls were a canvas for stories that needed to be told, and the people who gathered were hungry for authenticity and connection. Sarah felt more alive than she had in years, her heart swelling with pride as she watched Jason mingle with the artists, sharing his own insights and experiences. As the night went on, a group of well-dressed individuals arrived, looking out of place amidst the street performers and graffiti. Sarah recognized them as some of her mother's friends, their eyes widening in shock as they took in the scene before them. But instead of the embarrassment she had feared, she felt a sense of power. This was her world now, and she wasn't going to apologize for it. The exhibition was a resounding success, and as the last guests filtered out, Sarah looked at Jason with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of emotion, "for showing me that there's more to life than just their approval." He took her in his arms, his own smile just as bright. "You don't need anyone else's approval but your own," he whispered. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely the sting of her parents' rejection began to fade. Sarah threw herself into her work at the gallery, championing the kind of art that spoke to her soul. She and Jason grew closer, their love a beacon of light in the face of adversity. One day she received a call from her mother. It was short and to the point. "Your father and I would like to see you," Eleanor said. "There's something we need to discuss." Sarah's stomach clenched, but she agreed to meet them at their townhouse. As she walked through the door, she braced herself for the worst. The room was tense as Sarah sat across from her parents, who were perched on the edge of their opulent sofa. The silence was suffocating, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice measured and cold. "We've given this a lot of thought, and we've decided that if you choose to continue this relationship with Jason, we will be forced to cut you off from your inheritance." Sarah's heart plummeted, but she didn't let it show on her face. She had been expecting something like this, but the reality of the words was still a blow. "You can't do that," she exclaimed, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "You can't control my life like that." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "We're not trying to control you, dear," she said, her voice a brittle facade of calm. "We're just looking out for your best interests. You have a duty to this family to uphold our legacy." "My best interests are with Jason," she shot back, her voice firm, "and my legacy is my own to create." Her parents exchanged a look, one filled with disappointment and resignation. "If that's your choice," Charles said, his voice heavy with finality, "then so be it, but know that it comes at a cost." "I've made my choice," Sarah said, her eyes unwavering, "and I'm not going to let money come between me and the person I love." The words hung in the air, a declaration of war. The room felt like it was closing in on her, but she refused to back down. "Very well," Charles said, his jaw clenched. "We will respect your decision, but we can no longer support you financially." Eleanor reached out to take her hand, but Sarah pulled away. "Please think about this," she pleaded. You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I'd be making is giving up on love for your version of success," she said, standing up. "I won't do that." As she turned to leave, the weight of their ultimatum settled on her shoulders like a leaden cloak. She had never felt more alone, more like an outsider in her own home. But she knew she had made the right choice. In the weeks that followed, Sarah felt the sting of their words every time she had to turn down an invitation to an exclusive event or explain to friends why she wasn't attending the season's hottest art exhibition. She had never realized how much her parents' money and influence had been a part of her identity until it was gone. But Jason was her rock. He worked tirelessly, his art gaining more and more recognition. He painted murals on the sides of buildings and sold his work at local markets, and slowly but surely, they began to build a life together. One day, as she watched him from the window of their small apartment, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was where she belonged, not in the stifling world of her parents' wealth, but in the vibrant, pulsing heart of the city, surrounded by art that made people feel something. Their relationship grew stronger with every challenge they faced, and their love became a beacon that guided them through the dark times. They supported each other's dreams, and together they created a new kind of family, one built on love, acceptance, and mutual respect. Months passed, and the anger towards her parents slowly began to morph into something else, understanding. She knew that they came from a different time, with different values, but she also knew that she had to live her life on her own terms. Then, one rainy afternoon, she received an unexpected message from her mother. "Your art exhibition was mentioned in the society pages," it read. "Your father and I are proud of you. Can we talk?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea how her mother had found out about the exhibition, but she knew this was a step in the right direction. The conversation was stilted at first, filled with awkward pauses and forced politeness. But as they talked, she realized that her parents had seen the impact of her choices, the joy she found in her work, the strength of her convictions, and the love she had for Jason. "They didn't agree with her, Elle. They didn't agree with my choices," Sarah told Jason later that night, her voice still shaking with emotion. "But they saw that I was happy. That's all they've ever wanted for me." Jason pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart pounding with hope. "Maybe this is the beginning of something new," he whispered. "Maybe they're learning to accept us." The following months were a series of tentative steps toward reconciliation. Her parents attended more of Jason's exhibitions, and though their praise was often tinged with a hint of confusion, it was genuine. They began to see the value in the art that spoke to the soul of the city and the people who walked its streets. And then, one fateful evening, Eleanor turned to them with a tremulous smile. "You know," she said, "I think I might actually like street art." It was a small victory, but it was enough. Sarah felt the tension in the air dissipate, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw her parents as people, not just as the gatekeepers of a world she no longer wanted to be a part of. They continued to build their lives together, with Sarah's parents slowly but surely becoming a part of it. They saw the beauty in their differences and the strength in their union. The inheritance remained a point of contention, but Sarah had come to realize that the richness of her life lay in her love for Jason and their shared passion for art, not in the material wealth that could never truly define her. Their love story became the ultimate masterpiece, painted with the vibrant colors of hope, resilience, and courage. And as they stood in their apartment, surrounded by the art that had brought them together and the love that had seen them through their darkest days, they knew that they had created something far more valuable than any amount of money could buy. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "for never giving up on us." Jason kissed her forehead. "Thank you for never giving up on yourself," he murmured. We're in this together, now and always.